A mother went to a party with friends and never made it home. By morning, she was found dead in the backyard. Police ruled it an accident, claiming she fell from a balcony. But her injuries didn't add up, and soon suspicions of negligence, cover-up, and something much darker took hold. This is the story of Tamla Horsford, the party death that shouldn't have happened. Tamla Horsford was unforgettable. At 40 years old, she radiated warmth and energy. Born in St. Vincent in the Caribbean, she had rich brown skin, long dark hair, and a smile that seemed to light up every room she entered. At 5 feet 5 inches with an athletic build, she carried herself with confidence and charm. Most of all, Tamla was a devoted mother of 5 boys. To friends, she was the kind of woman who brought joy wherever she went. Playful, nurturing, and endlessly social. She loved children, sports, and gatherings with friends. A night out was rare for her, but when she went, she lit up the room. On November 3, 2018, Tamla did something unusual. She allowed herself a night off. The event was a birthday sleepover hosted by Jean Myers, a woman she knew through her children's sports community. Guests planned to eat, drink, relax, and stay the night. The setting: a 2-story suburban home in Cumming, Georgia. Comfortable, quiet, the kind of place no one would expect tragedy to strike. The guest list was small but familiar to each other. Jean Myers, the host, in her 40s, polite, friendly, and deeply involved in her community. Madeline Lombardi, Jean's aunt, who lived in the basement apartment. Several close friends of Jean, all white women around the same age, most of them mothers themselves. 2 men, Jean's boyfriend, Jose Barrera, and another guest's husband, who dropped in later in the night. Tamla was the only black woman at the party. She didn't know everyone well, but she arrived with her usual spirit, dressed in a playful white paw print onesie, laughing, smiling, and carrying herself with the warmth that defined her. The night unfolded like many suburban gatherings. Drinks poured, shots passed around, football on TV. The women gossiped, played games, and stepped outside onto the balcony for cigarettes. Tamla joined in freely, sipping on drinks and taking smoke breaks outside. But later, recollections left room for unease. Some guests said she was drinking heavily, though others described her as steady and cheerful. No one reported fights or arguments. Yet Tamla was marked as an outsider, warmly included, but not truly part of the inner circle. Still, nothing seemed out of place. No one predicted what would happen before sunrise. By 7:45 a.m. the next morning, Tamla Horsford would be found face down in the backyard, lifeless. Police would rule it an accident, claiming she fell from the balcony during the night. But the injuries, the inconsistencies, and the shadows surrounding those who were there told a story far more disturbing. She came to the party smiling. By morning, she was gone, and the explanations given never added up. The Myers house was quiet in the early hours of November 4th, 2018. The football games, the laughter, the drinks from the night before, all of it had faded into heavy sleep. At 7:30 a.m., Jean Myers began moving about her home. Some guests were still asleep in bedrooms, others slowly stirring awake. In the basement apartment, Jean's aunt, Madeline Lombardi, headed to her window. At 7:45 a.m., she froze. Out in the yard, she saw a figure. A woman in white, face down in the grass, unmoving. It was Tamla Horsford. Madeline's shout rang through the house. Jean rushed to the window and saw the same sight. Tamla sprawled out, her arms at her sides, her legs stretched stiffly behind her. Inside, panic rippled unevenly. Some guests gasped, horrified. Others whispered nervously, trying to process what they were seeing. And a few, Most notably, Jean's boyfriend, Jose Barrera, remained composed, as though they already knew what to expect. Jose grabbed the phone and dialed 911. The call has been preserved, and its tone is striking. Calm. Too calm.
"We had people over last night, and we were drinking. Most of us went to bed around 1 o'clock. My girlfriend's aunt found her face down in the backyard. It looks like she may have fallen from the balcony."
The dispatcher asked if Tamla was breathing. Barrera's voice was steady.
"No, she's not. I see a small cut on her wrist, and she's stiff."
From the moment of that call, the story was already in place. Tamla had fallen. She had been drinking. It was an accident. At approximately 8 a.m., Forsyth County deputies arrived at the Myers home. They moved quickly to the backyard, where Tamla's body still lay on the grass. Her white paw-print onesie clung to her frame, damp with dew. Her face was pressed into the earth. The deputies glanced upward toward the second-story balcony, then back down to her body. Within minutes, they began repeating the same assumption. Looks like she fell. Inside, guests were gathered in the living room. Deputies asked them brief questions. The answers were short, almost uniform. Tamla had been drinking heavily. She was last seen around 1:30 a.m., going outside for a smoke. No one saw her fall. No one heard a sound. Some guests cried as they spoke. Others sat stiff, heads down. And a few, witnesses later recalled, seemed strangely calm. Too calm for a morning that should have been filled with shock. By 9 a.m., investigators were already shaping their report. The cause of death, they believed, was obvious. A drunken accident, but to Tamla's family, and to many who would later examine the case, nothing about the scene was obvious. The position of her body, the quick acceptance of a fall, the eerie calm of those inside. From the very beginning, the story didn't feel like the truth. Tamla Horsford's death was ruled a fall. But when her injuries were examined, the explanation began to unravel. Police said Tamla Horsford's death was an accident, a drunken fall from a second-story balcony. But her body told a different story. The autopsy listed multiple blunt force injuries. Her wrist was fractured. Her face bore abrasions and cuts. Bruises stretched across her shins and arms, and her neck had suffered trauma so severe it immediately drew suspicion. At first glance, these injuries sound like the aftermath of a fall. But when investigators and medical experts began to piece them together, the details broke apart. The wrist fracture suggested Tamla instinctively tried to brace herself. This is common in forward falls. The body reflexively extends the hands to shield the head. But if she did, why was she found face down, her arms pinned neatly at her sides? Reflexive defense explains one piece. The final position erases it. Her face showed multiple abrasions and cuts. Grass should not have caused such damage. It is soft, forgiving. Cuts spread across more than one area suggest her head struck more than a single surface. Did she hit the railing on her way down? Did she collide with the balcony edge? Or do those scattered wounds tell the story of something else, a struggle before she ever reached the ground? Her legs and arms carried bruises and lacerations. Some were low, near the shins, as though she struck something while falling. Others were higher, inconsistent with one clean impact. A single fall should produce clustered injuries. Tamla's were scattered, telling a story of multiple impacts, or multiple events. The most haunting injury was to her neck. Severe trauma that, on paper, could be chalked up to a bad landing. But experts who later reviewed the file noticed something different. The pattern resembled the kind of damage seen in forceful restraint. Whiplash, violent pressure, even strangulation. Could this be from a fall into grass? Yes, it is possible, but the severity made it unlikely. And then there were the smaller, unsettling details. A sharp cut on her wrist, too clean to be explained by grass or dirt. Soil under her fingernails, as if she clawed at the ground or something else in her final moments. All of this must be measured against what was seen that morning. Tamla was discovered lying face down, perfectly straight, her legs extended, her arms aligned at her sides. Victims of falls don't land neatly. They land twisted, limbs sprawled, bodies at odd angles. Gravity produces chaos. Tamla's body showed order. When physics is applied, 3 competing scenarios emerge. She may have toppled and struck multiple surfaces before the ground, but then her body should not have been aligned so neatly. She may have been incapacitated before falling, which would explain her lack of defensive posture. But then her wrist should not have been fractured in a bracing attempt. Or, perhaps most chilling of all, she may have been moved after the fact, her final position staged to match the story already being told. Each theory explains part of the puzzle. None explain it all. And all stand in conflict with the official conclusion. Accident. For Tamla's family, this wasn't just sloppy science. It was a betrayal. They knew her. She was athletic, coordinated, not reckless. To believe she simply fell, and that her broken body happened to end up face down, arms at her sides, was impossible. Her injuries didn't silence questions. They screamed them louder. And what they screamed was simple. This was not just a fall. The autopsy said accident. But the investigation that followed, rushed, careless, and contradictory, only deepened the suspicion. The Forsyth County Sheriff's Office claimed Tamla Horsford's death was an accident, but their investigation read less like a search for truth and more like a checklist. Rushed, shallow, and full of holes. When deputies arrived at the Myers home on the morning of November 4th, they had a decision to make. Treat the scene as a potential crime scene, or treat it as an accident. Within minutes, they chose the latter. From that moment forward, critical steps were skipped. No one dusted the balcony railing for fingerprints. If Tamla had leaned too far, her prints or smudges should have been there. None were checked. The grass beneath her body was never tested for drag marks or impressions. If she had fallen, the impact should have disturbed the ground in a measurable way. Investigators took no soil samples. No swabs were taken for DNA. No blood spatter analysis was performed. Even the paw print onesie she was wearing, potentially crucial for detecting fibers, skin cells, or defensive marks, was not thoroughly examined. The balcony itself was left untouched. Deputies didn't measure the height of the railing or test whether it would have been easy or difficult to topple over. They accepted the explanation that she fell, without ever testing if falling was plausible. Security cameras in the neighborhood were never canvassed. No effort was made to check if nearby homes or businesses had captured video of the house that night. Phone records were ignored. Investigators never pulled Tamla's texts or calls from that evening to reconstruct her final movements. Nor did they examine the phones of the guests inside the house to verify their accounts. Even alcohol testing was incomplete. While Tamla's blood alcohol level was recorded, deputies never tested whether her drinks at the party had been spiked. No toxicology screen was performed for unusual substances that could have explained unconsciousness or disorientation. Instead, investigators relied almost entirely on witness statements. Statements from people who were all friends, who all told the same story, and who all had reason to protect each other. The contradictions in their accounts, whether Tamla was steady or stumbling, whether she was last seen inside or outside, whether anyone heard a fall or not, were glossed over. And in the middle of it all stood Jose Barrera, the boyfriend of the host and the man who placed the 911 call. His calm voice had already set the narrative. Tamla fell. And because Barrera worked within the Forsyth County court system, Critics later argued that deputies had no interest in digging deeper. To question him would be to question one of their own. By the time the sheriff's office closed the file, the case had already been decided. Tamla's death was labeled an accident. The missing fingerprints, the untested soil, the ignored toxicology, all of it disappeared into silence. For her family, these weren't minor oversights. They were signs of a willful blindness. An investigation that seemed less about uncovering what happened that night, and more about making sure no uncomfortable answers ever surfaced. The sheriff's office closed the file. But to Tamla's family, her friends, and soon the wider public, the holes in the investigation were impossible to ignore. And suspicion of a cover-up began to spread. The Forsyth County Sheriff's Office closed Tamla Horsford's case as an accident. But from the very beginning, almost no one outside of law enforcement believed that explanation. The first wave of doubt came from her family. They had seen the autopsy. A fractured wrist, deep bruises along her body, severe trauma to her neck, cuts across her face, injuries that didn't make sense for a single fall into grass. And her position on the ground, face down, arms pinned at her sides, legs perfectly straight, looked staged, not chaotic. Her family knew her well. She wasn't clumsy, she wasn't reckless, she wasn't the kind of woman who simply toppled over a railing. Then came the timeline. Tamla was last seen around 1:30 a.m. by some guests. Others remembered her inside near that time, chatting and smoking. But after that, she vanished from their stories. For 6 hours, no one admitted to seeing or hearing anything. No thud, no cry, no sound of impact. Her body was only discovered at 7:45 a.m. by Jean's aunt in the basement apartment. A fall should have been immediate. A crash should have been heard. Instead, there was silence. 6 hours of silence. And then there was the investigation itself. Deputies never dusted the balcony railing for fingerprints. They never searched the grass for drag marks or tested the trajectory of a fall. They didn't canvass the neighborhood for cameras. They didn't pull phone records to verify timelines. Instead, they listened to the guests, friends of the host, and accepted their words without challenge. The 911 call played a central role. Jana's boyfriend, Jose Barrera, calmly told the dispatcher Tamla must have fallen from the balcony. His words set the tone before deputies even arrived. And Barrera wasn't just a random guest. He worked within the Forsyth County court system. To Tamla's supporters, it was obvious. Connections mattered more than truth. As word spread, suspicion grew into outrage. On social media, her name became a rallying cry. People asked the questions law enforcement hadn't. Why was she the only black woman at that party? Why was her case closed so quickly? Why did her injuries look more like violence than accident? For many, race could not be ignored. To them, this was not just about one woman's death, it was about a pattern. A black woman dead in a white household, her body written off, her story silenced. It echoed a history too familiar. Black women's deaths dismissed, their families forced to beg for answers. Tamla's family refused to accept the accident ruling. They spoke of her spirit, her athleticism, her devotion to her children. They knew she had been vibrant, strong, and full of life. This wasn't a woman who simply drank too much and stumbled to her death. Something happened that night, something no one at the party wanted to admit. As the weeks passed, the silence from law enforcement grew louder. There were no follow-up investigations, no pursuit of inconsistencies, no effort to address the mounting questions. And into that silence rushed suspicion. Suspicion that her death wasn't just ignored, but deliberately covered up. By then, the story of Tamla Horsford was no longer a quiet case in Georgia. It was a national conversation. To her family and supporters, the phrase, accidental fall was more than wrong. It was insulting. To them, it was clear. Tamla Horsford hadn't just died, she had been failed by the people at that party, by investigators, and by a system too willing to look the other way. Her family believed she was failed. The public believed she was silenced. And soon, theories about what really happened that night began to take hold. Theories that refused to die. When the sheriff's office closed the case, it didn't bring peace. It created a vacuum. And in that vacuum, theories rushed in. The first was the official version, the accident theory. Investigators claimed Tamla had been drinking heavily, stepped out onto the balcony for a cigarette, leaned too far, and toppled over the railing. They said her blood alcohol level proved impairment. To them, it explained everything. Her fall, her injuries, her death. But the pieces never locked in. If she had fallen face first, why was her body perfectly aligned? Arms by her sides, legs straight, face down. If she'd been so intoxicated, why did some guests insist she was steady and cheerful, not stumbling or slurring? And why did no one hear a fall, a scream, or even a thud in the middle of the night? The second theory was darker. Foul play by someone at the party. Supporters of this version pointed to her injuries, the severe trauma to her neck, the scattered bruises on her shins and arms, the cut on her wrist, and the dirt beneath her nails. To them, these were signs of a struggle. Some speculated she may have been attacked after an argument. Others believed she was pushed, her body staged in the yard to make it look like an accident. The tidy position of her body, the absence of defensive postures, and the 6-hour gap before she was found fueled these suspicions. The third theory was even more disturbing: a cover-up by law enforcement. Jose Barrera, Jean Meyer's boyfriend, wasn't just any guest. He worked for the Forsyth County court system. He was also the man who placed the 911 call. His calm tone, his quick framing of the death as a fall, and his connections raised eyebrows. Critics argued that deputies were protecting their own. They ignored critical evidence, skipped forensic procedures, and rushed the case to closure. To Tamla's supporters, this wasn't mere incompetence. It was deliberate. And then came the theory that touched the rawest nerve: race as the silent factor. Tamla was the only black woman at a party full of white acquaintances. To many, that fact alone could not be separated from how her death was handled. Her case felt like part of a larger, painful pattern. Black women found dead under suspicious circumstances, their deaths dismissed, their families left begging for answers. The speed of the closure, the lack of urgency, the refusal to explore foul play, all of it echoed generations of racial injustice. Online, people dissected every detail. They replayed the 911 call, analyzing the calm tone. They debated the autopsy. They shared the contradictions in the timeline, pointing out how silence stretched across 6 crucial hours. Each theory carried its own logic. Each explained part of the puzzle, but none could explain everything. And that was the heart of the problem. The official story was too simple, the unofficial ones too fragmented. Tamla's death existed in the space between, a tragedy surrounded by questions, a case where the truth felt buried beneath silence. In the middle of this storm of theories, one voice never wavered: her family's. Refusing to be silenced, they turned grief into action, demanding justice for Tamla Horsford. For Tamla Horsford's family, closure never came. The sheriff's office called her death an accident, but to them it was a betrayal. They had seen the autopsy. They had seen the photographs. They knew her body told a story far darker than a fall. From the beginning, they spoke with raw honesty. They reminded the world who Tamla was, not a victim of her own recklessness, but a woman of strength and joy. Athletic, graceful, Devoted to her 5 children, she was the heartbeat of her family. Her loved ones refused to let her be reduced to a statistic. Her father spoke plainly. "My daughter didn't just fall. Someone knows what happened, and we will not stop until the truth comes out." Her friends echoed him, describing her as full of laughter and energy that night, steady on her feet, a direct contradiction to claim she was too intoxicated to stand. Her family's anger quickly spread beyond their living rooms. They organized vigils where candles flickered in the night, and Tamla's smiling face stared back from posters. At one rally, her relatives cried out, "Justice for Tamla! We will not be silent!" The crowd repeated their words, voices rising together into the dark Georgia sky. Online, her case exploded. Petitions demanding accountability gathered tens of thousands of signatures. People from across the country shared her story under hashtags like Justice for Tamla, outraged that her case had been dismissed so quickly. True crime groups dissected the timeline, pointing to contradictions, asking the questions investigators had ignored. Her family demanded more than signatures. They demanded action. They pushed for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to reopen the case. They called for federal oversight, insisting local law enforcement could not be trusted to investigate one of their own. "We need eyes outside of Forsyth County," her mother said, her voice breaking but firm, "because the truth will not come from within." National media picked up her story, shining a spotlight on Forsyth County. Journalists asked the same questions her family had asked. Why weren't fingerprints lifted from the railing? Why weren't the guests pressed harder? Why was the case closed so quickly? The answers, or lack thereof, only strengthened suspicion. For her family, every interview, every vigil, every headline was both a reminder of their grief and a weapon in their fight. They refused to let Tamla's name fade into silence. Her stepdaughter summed it up best. "She was full of life. Someone took that away from us, and we will never stop fighting for her." Through their persistence, Tamla's case became more than a tragedy. It became a movement, a demand for justice not just for her, but for every Black woman whose death had been dismissed, every family forced to beg for answers. To them, Tamla's death was not the end. It was the beginning of a fight they vowed to carry until the truth was known. Her family's voice gave Tamla's story power. And though justice has never arrived, her name became a symbol. A legacy of love, resistance, and a mystery that refuses to be forgotten. Tamla Horsford went to a party with friends and never came home. The sheriff's office called it an accident. Her family called it negligence, and the public called it something far darker, a cover-up. Her case remains officially closed. No one has been charged. No one has been held accountable. And the questions that haunted the morning of November 4th, 2018, remain unanswered today. But Tamla's story didn't end in that Forsyth County backyard. It grew louder. Her family's relentless fight ensured her name would not be forgotten. Vigils were held, petitions signed, interviews broadcast. Her smiling face spread across social media, paired with a single demand: justice for Tamla. In 2020, as America erupted in protests over racial injustice, Tamla's case resurfaced as a rallying cry. Her story was held up as an example of how Black women's deaths are too often dismissed, how accountability is too often denied, and how families are forced to wage war against silence. To this day, her name is spoken not only as a victim, but as a symbol. A reminder of how fragile truth can be when institutions close their doors, and how powerful families can be when they refuse to stop knocking. Tamla Horsford was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a mother of 5 children who will grow up without her. She was vibrant, radiant, unforgettable. And though justice has not yet come, her legacy endures. In the candles lit at vigils, in the voices chanting her name, and in the questions that refuse to die. She went to a party one night. By morning, she was gone, and the mystery of her death still haunts Georgia and the nation. This is the story of Tamla Horsford, the party death that should not have happened. If this case moved you, don't let her name fade. Share her story, keep asking questions, and remember, some mysteries demand answers.